The air in the crematorium chapel was thick with the scent of lilies and unspoken resentments. Amelia stood by the simple wooden urn, a solitary island in a sea of polite, dark-clad strangers. Her father, a man who had been a titan in a world she never knew, was now just a container of ash. The grief was a strange, hollow thing, a mourning for a relationship that had never truly been allowed to flourish. It was a private sorrow, one she felt she had no right to display. Her husband, Mark, was not beside her. He stood near the back, whispering to his mother, Eleanor. Their posture was one of impatience, a performance of support that was wearing thin. They had not come for her. They had come to be seen, to ensure their social obligations were met, even for a man they had openly despised as Amelia's estranged, and in their eyes, unimportant, father. Amelia felt a familiar coldness seep into her bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the chapel's aggressive air conditioning. It was the coldness of 10 years of being treated as an accessory, a disappointment, a bridge to a fortune that had never materialized. Mark had married her believing her father's name, Sterling, meant an easy life. He had been bitterly mistaken. The service concluded with a few murmured platitudes from a hired officiant who had never met her father. As people began to file out, offering Amelia condolences that felt like empty air, Mark finally approached. His face was a mask of strained sympathy, but his eyes were hard, like chips of granite. Eleanor followed, her lips pursed in a permanent state of disapproval. "Well, that's that," Mark said, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. A rather dreary affair for a man who supposedly had so much. Amelia flinched but said nothing. There was nothing to say. Arguing would only invite a scene, and she had no energy left for their cruel theatre. "We need to talk, Amelia," he continued, his tone shifting, becoming sharper. He glanced around the thinning crowd, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. It was the look he got right before he was about to break something, and usually that something was her spirit. He gestured toward a young woman who had been lingering near him and his mother. She was beautiful, dressed in a black dress that was just a little too fashionable, a little too tight for a funeral. She stepped forward, her expression a mixture of pity and triumph. "Amelia," Mark said, the words cutting through the solemn atmosphere like a blade. "This is Chloe." The name meant nothing to Amelia, but the way Mark said it, the proprietary hand he placed on the small of Chloe's back, told her everything. This was not an introduction, it was a declaration. "Chloe is a very important person in my life," Mark continued, his voice swelling with a disgusting sort of pride. "The future, you might say." Chloe offered a small, insincere smile. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said, her voice dripping with false empathy. It was the voice of a victor offering condolences to the vanquished. Amelia's world tilted. Here, in the shadow of her father's remains, her husband was ending their marriage. He was introducing his mistress. The humiliation was so profound, so exquisitely timed for maximum cruelty that she couldn't breathe. It was a public execution of her dignity. Eleanor stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with vindictive pleasure. "It's for the best, dear," she cooed, her voice like nails on a chalkboard. "Mark needs someone who can support him, someone with prospects. You were always just dead weight. A reminder of a failed investment." The words struck Amelia with the force of a physical blow. A failed investment. That was all she had ever been to them. "Our marriage is over, Amelia," Mark stated, his voice now cold and final. He was enjoying this, feeding off her shock and pain. I've put up with your family's pathetic drama and your lack of ambition for long enough. I'm done being shackled to your nothingness." He wanted her to scream, to cry, to make a scene, but she couldn't. A strange, protective numbness washed over her. She simply stared at him, at the woman beside him, at his gloating mother, and felt a profound, desolate emptiness. As they turned to leave, a tall, older gentleman in a perfectly tailored suit stepped into their path. He had been watching from a distance, his expression unreadable. He looked directly at Amelia, his eyes conveying a quiet sort of strength. "Mr. Sterling would be disappointed," the man said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority that made Mark and Eleanor pause. Mark scoffed. "And who are you?" "My name is Arthur Thompson," the man replied, his gaze never leaving Amelia. "I was your father's attorney, and his friend." He held out a simple cream-coloured envelope. It was sealed with wax, bearing the subtle imprint of an S. "He asked me to give this to you, Amelia, and only you." Amelia took the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. It felt heavy, impossibly heavy, with the weight of her father's final words. Mark eyed it with greedy curiosity, but Mr. Thompson positioned himself just so, a silent guardian blocking him. Mark, Eleanor, and Chloe swept out of the chapel, leaving a wake of poisonous silence. Amelia was left standing alone, clutching the envelope, the scent of lilies suddenly suffocating. The public humiliation was complete, but as she looked at the seal on the envelope, a tiny, unfamiliar flicker of something other than despair began to stir within her. It was a seed of mystery planted in the barren soil of her grief. The ride home was a silent torment. Mark drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, radiating a smug, triumphant energy. He had done it. He had finally cut the cord. He had inflicted the ultimate wound in the most public way possible, and he was proud of it. Amelia sat in the passenger seat, the envelope from Mr. Thompson resting in her lap like a stone. She could feel Mark's occasional glances, his curiosity warring with his contempt. He undoubtedly thought it contained some sentimental nonsense, perhaps a few $100s her father had scraped together as a final, pathetic gesture. Their small, rented house felt different when they walked in. It felt like a cage she had only just realized she was in. The furniture, the photos on the wall, the life they had built, it was all a lie. It was a stage set for a decade-long performance of her inadequacy. "I'll have my lawyer send over the papers tomorrow," Mark announced, tossing his keys onto the counter. "I'm being generous. I won't ask for much. Just the house and its contents. You can have your clothes." He said it as if he were bestowing a great charity upon her. The house was in his name. The bank account was in his name. Every part of her life had been carefully curated by him and his mother to ensure her complete dependence. "You have nowhere to go, of course," he continued, pacing the small living room. "But that's not my problem. You should have thought of that before you failed to charm that rich father of yours." The cruelty was relentless, methodical. He was stripping her of everything, piece by piece, and enjoying the process. Amelia retreated to the bedroom, the only space that felt remotely hers. She sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress creaking like an old church door, and finally looked at the envelope. Her hands were surprisingly steady as she broke the wax seal. Inside, there was no letter filled with apologies or explanations. There was only a single, ornate, old-fashioned key and a small, stiff card. On the card, an address was elegantly printed: Thompson and Sterling, 1400 Sterling Plaza, downtown. Below it, a handwritten note in her father's sharp, decisive script: "The truth is waiting for you. Be strong." The truth. What truth? The truth was that her father had kept her at arm's length her entire life. The truth was that he had disapproved of her choices, her desire for a simple life, her marriage to a man like Mark. The truth was that he had left her alone to face this nightmare. A wave of anger, hot and sharp, cut through her numbness. Anger at her father for his distance, anger at Mark for his betrayal, anger at Eleanor for her ceaseless contempt, and for the first time in a very long time, a burning anger at herself for letting them do this to her, for shrinking herself down to fit into the tiny, suffocating box they had built for her. Mark appeared in the doorway, a look of derision on his face. "What is it? Did the old man leave you his pocket watch? Don't worry, I'll let you keep that. It might fetch you $50 at a pawn shop." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. That night he slept in the guest room, a symbolic gesture of their new reality. Amelia lay awake, the key clutched in her hand. It felt cold and solid, a tangible piece of a puzzle she didn't understand. The next day, the divorce papers arrived via courier. As Mark had promised, they were brutal. He was claiming everything. He had even drafted a narrative of her being an unstable and unsupportive wife. Attached was a settlement offer, a one-time payment of $5,000, a sum so insulting it was clearly meant as a final slap in the face. Mark slid the documents across the kitchen table. "Sign it, Amelia. It's more than you deserve. Take the money and disappear," sneered. "A little something to get you sneered. A little something to get you started. Don't say I never gave you anything." The sight of the cash thrown at her like scraps for a dog was the final spark. The years of quiet endurance, of swallowing her pride, of accepting their narrative of her worthlessness, it all burned away in that instant. The sleeping giant inside her stirred. She didn't touch the money, she didn't look at the papers. She simply picked up her purse, the key and the card, safely inside, and stood up. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded. "Out," she said, her voice even and dangerously calm. She walked out of the house, leaving him standing there amidst the wreckage of their life. She didn't know where she was going, not really, but she knew she was walking toward the address on that card. She was walking toward the truth, whatever it was. With nothing left to lose, she had finally found the one thing they could never take from her, a reason to fight back. The bus ride downtown was a journey into another world. As the modest suburban homes gave way to towering monoliths of glass and steel, Amelia felt a growing sense of intimidation. Sterling Plaza was the tallest of them all, a gleaming testament to power and wealth that seemed to pierce the sky. It bore her name, yet it felt as alien as a distant planet. She had always known her father was wealthy. It was an abstract fact, a source of conflict and distance between them. He had wanted her to join his world, to be his heir. But as a young woman, she had seen it as a gilded cage. She had rebelled, choosing a modest life, choosing Mark, a decision that had proven to be a catastrophic mistake. She had traded one cage for another, smaller and far crueler. The lobby of Sterling Plaza was a cathedral of commerce. Marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting, and a hushed efficiency permeated the air. Men and women in sharp suits moved with a sense of purpose that made Amelia, in her simple dress, feel utterly out of place. She approached the main directory, her heart pounding. Thompson and Sterling. Penthouse suite, of course. In the elevator, a silent, mirrored box ascending at a dizzying speed, she saw her reflection. She saw a woman who looked tired, lost, and defeated. She saw the woman Mark and Eleanor had tried to create. But in her eyes there was a new glint of determination. Her father's last words echoed in her mind. "Be strong." The penthouse doors opened directly into the law firm's reception area. It was less an office and more a luxurious living space with panoramic views of the city, expensive art on the walls and plush leather furniture. A polite receptionist greeted her, and upon hearing her name, her expression shifted to one of deep, deferential respect. "Miss Sterling, Mr. Thompson is expecting you. Right this way." Arthur Thompson was waiting for her in a vast corner office. The desk was a massive slab of polished mahogany, but he wasn't behind it. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city that her father had, in many ways, built. "Amelia," he said, turning to her with a warm, almost paternal smile. "I'm so glad you came. Please sit." He gestured to a comfortable armchair opposite his desk. As she sat, he retrieved a thick, leather-bound portfolio. "I know this is a difficult time for you," he began, his voice gentle. "And what I am about to tell you will likely be overwhelming. But your father was very specific in his instructions. He wanted you to know the full truth only after he was gone." Amelia braced herself. She expected to hear about a modest trust fund, perhaps enough to live on for a year or two, a final, guilty apology from a distant father. Thompson opened the portfolio. "Amelia, your father, Richard Sterling, did not just own a few successful companies. Over the last 30 years, he built an empire, a global dynasty. He created Sterling Global Holdings." He pushed a document across the desk. It was a corporate flowchart, a dizzying web of names and connections, media conglomerates, tech startups, international banks, real estate portfolios, pharmaceutical research labs. The names were all familiar, titans of industry she read about in the news. And at the very top, connecting them all, was one name: Sterling Global. "Your father was a very private man," Thompson continued. "He used a complex system of trusts and shell corporations to manage his assets. Very few people knew the true extent of his ownership. He controlled everything, but his name was almost never in the spotlight." Amelia stared at the chart, her mind struggling to process the scale of it. It was incomprehensible. "When you were born," Thompson said, his voice softening, "he designated you as his sole heir. Everything you see here, everything he built it for you." He slid another document toward her. It was a copy of her father's last will and testament. The legal language was dense, but the final clause was terrifyingly clear. "I, Richard Sterling, do hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, including my controlling interest in Sterling Global Holdings and all its subsidiary assets, to my only child, Amelia Sterling." Thompson let the words hang in the air. "The total valuation of the assets, as of this morning's market close, is approximately $55 billion. The number didn't register. It was too large, too abstract. 55 billion. It wasn't money, it was a concept, a weather pattern, the weight of a mountain. I don't understand," Amelia stammered. "He and I, we were estranged. He disapproved of my life." "He disapproved of your husband," Thompson corrected gently. "He saw Mark for exactly what he was, a shallow, opportunistic parasite. Your father investigated him thoroughly when you first got married. He knew about his debts, his ambition, his cruelty. Richard's distance was not a punishment, Amelia. It was a protection. He was waiting. He hoped you would see the truth for yourself, and he didn't want Mark to ever get his hands on this." It was too much. The grief, the betrayal, and now this. A revelation so monumental it threatened to shatter her reality. She was not the penniless, worthless woman she had been led to believe she was. She was one of the wealthiest people in the world. "The key," she whispered, remembering the object in her purse. Thompson smiled. "Ah, yes, the final piece." He led her to a large, unassuming painting on the wall. He pressed a hidden switch, and the painting slid aside to reveal a high-security vault. He entered a code, and the thick steel door swung open. Inside was a single safe deposit box. "Your father's private vault," Thompson explained. "Only that key can open it." With a trembling hand, Amelia inserted the key. It turned smoothly. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on black velvet, were the original physical share certificates for Sterling Global Holdings and the master deeds to properties and assets around the globe. All of them were in her name. As she stared at the documents, a final, devastating piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Thompson, seeing the look on her face, knew she was getting there. He walked back to his desk and picked up another file, this one much slimmer. "Your father was a meticulous man," he said quietly. "He kept an eye on everything that might affect you. That included your husband's business affairs." He opened the file. "Mark's real estate development company, Prestige Homes, is failing. It's leveraged to the hilt, buried in debt." He pointed to a name on a loan agreement. "His primary lender, the institution that holds all his debt, is the Apex Commercial Bank." He paused, letting her connect the dots. She looked back at the corporate flowchart. There it was, a subsidiary under the financial services branch of Sterling Global, Apex Commercial Bank. "You don't just own a company that owns the bank," Thompson clarified, his voice grim. "You are the bank. You own his debt. Every penny." The irony was so staggering, so profoundly, cruelly perfect, that Amelia almost laughed. Mark, who had belittled her for her lack of prospects, had unknowingly been borrowing money from her all along. His entire world, the very foundation of his arrogant superiority, was owned by the woman he had just discarded like trash. But Thompson wasn't finished. "There's one more thing. Eleanor's precious charity, the Westwood Foundation for the Arts. The source of all her social standing." He produced another document. It was a funding agreement. "Your father was its largest and only anonymous benefactor. He found her vanity amusing. The foundation is funded entirely by a trust which, as of this morning, you now control." Amelia sank back into the chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her. She held all the cards. She owned their world. She had the power to dismantle their lives with a single phone call. The humiliation at the funeral, the years of quiet suffering, the sight of Mark throwing money at her feet, it all coalesced into a single, clarifying point of cold, hard rage. She looked up at Arthur Thompson, the exhaustion and grief in her eyes replaced by a fire he had not seen before. It was the look of a queen who had just been handed her crown and scepter. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice no longer trembling, but imbued with a chilling calm. "Show me how it works. Show me how to burn it all down." The days that followed were a blur of transformation. Amelia moved out of the small hotel she'd checked into, and, at Thompson's insistence, took up residence in her father's private penthouse apartment atop Sterling Plaza. It was a world of quiet luxury and breathtaking views, a place that felt more like a fortress than a home. Here, surrounded by the artifacts of a life she never knew, she began to understand the man her father was. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a strategist, a grandmaster playing chess, while everyone else played checkers. And now she was his successor. Amelia spent hours locked in the conference room with Thompson and his team of ruthless, efficient lawyers and accountants. They were her generals, and she was their queen planning a war. They mapped out Mark's financial empire, a pathetic house of cards, and Eleanor's social standing, a fragile ecosystem built on a lie. "The approach must be surgical," Thompson advised, pointing to a diagram on a large screen. "A blunt attack is messy. We will use their own systems, their own arrogance against them. We will simply enforce the rules they believe do not apply to them." The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Phase 1 was to target Mark. His company, Prestige Homes, had multiple covenant breaches in its loan agreements with Apex Commercial Bank. He had been misrepresenting his assets and moving funds improperly for years. The bank, under its previous management, had been lax. Under its new silent owner, it would be anything but. Phase 2 was Eleanor. The trust funding her foundation had strict bylaws regarding financial transparency and performance. Thompson's forensic accountants had already found glaring irregularities. Eleanor had been using the foundation as her personal slush fund, paying for extravagant galas that were more about her own glorification than about supporting the arts. The decision point came on a cool evening, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. Thompson placed 2 documents in front of her. The first was a formal directive to the board of Apex Commercial Bank to immediately call in all loans related to Prestige Homes due to breach of contract. The second was a notice to the trustees of the Westwood Foundation, freezing all payments pending a full and immediate audit. All they needed was her signature. Amelia picked up the pen. Her mind flashed back to the funeral, to Mark's smug face, to Eleanor's condescending sneer, to Chloe's triumphant pity. She remembered the divorce papers on the kitchen table and the cash he had thrown at her. He had offered her $5,000 to disappear. She was about to cost him everything he had ever built. She thought of her father. Be strong. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice. It was the reclaiming of a life they had tried so desperately to diminish. She signed both documents with a firm, steady hand. Her signature, Amelia Sterling, looked different now. It looked powerful. "It's done," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. Thompson nodded, a flicker of grim satisfaction in his eyes. He picked up the phone. "Initiate the protocols," he said simply, and hung up. The first domino had been pushed. From her perch high above the city, Amelia Sterling, the sleeping giant, was about to unleash a storm. She would remain in the shadows, a ghost in their machine, and watch as their carefully constructed world crumbled into dust. The time for suffering was over. The time for reckoning had begun. Mark was in his office, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, when the first email arrived. It was from the legal department of Apex Commercial Bank. The subject line was stark, urgent, notice of loan acceleration, and immediate demand for payment. He chuckled, assuming it was a bureaucratic error. He had a cozy relationship with his loan officer. A quick phone call would clear this up. He was a big shot, a man on the move. Banks didn't treat him this way. He dialed the number, leaning back in his chair, already composing the condescending speech he would give the clerk who made the mistake. But he didn't get his loan officer. He was routed to a senior vice president he had never spoken to, a man with a voice as cold as a morgue slab. "Mr. Preston," the voice said, using his last name with a formal chill. "There is no mistake. Your entire credit facility, totaling $27 million, has been called. As per the terms of your agreement, which you have breached on multiple counts, full repayment is due within 72 hours. Mark's blood ran cold. "Breached? What are you talking about? This is insane." "The specifics have been detailed in the official notice sent to your legal counsel," the man continued, his tone utterly devoid of emotion. "Failure to comply will result in the immediate seizure of all collateralized assets. That includes all company properties, accounts receivable, and your personal residence. Have a good day." The line went dead. Panic, raw and electric, seized him. 27 million. He didn't have 27,000 in liquid cash. His entire life was a performance financed by debt. He frantically called his lawyer, who confirmed he had received the notice. It was ironclad. "They're citing financial misrepresentation, Mark," his lawyer yelled over the phone. "What have you been doing?" At the same time, across town, Eleanor was preparing for her foundation's annual gala, the crown jewel of her social calendar. She was on the phone with a caterer, arguing about the price of champagne, when her assistant buzzed in, her voice trembling. "Madam Preston, there's a man here from the bank, and an auditor. They have a letter from the trust." Eleanor swept into the reception area, indignation radiating from her. She was confronted by two grim-faced men in suits. They handed her a letter. It informed her that the Sterling Trust, the Foundation's sole benefactor, had frozen all assets and initiated a full forensic audit due to suspected financial mismanagement. All Foundation credit cards were suspended. All operational accounts were locked. "This is preposterous," she shrieked. "I am the head of this foundation."
"You can't do this." "We can, and we have," the auditor said, flatly. "We are to secure all financial records, effective immediately." The news spread through the city's elite like wildfire. Eleanor's gala was cancelled. Whispers turned into headlines. The Westwood Foundation was under investigation. Eleanor Preston, the grand dame of philanthropy, was being accused of fraud. Her phone, which usually rang with invitations and gossip, fell silent. Her friends, the ones who had flattered her for years, suddenly didn't know her name. The cascade effect was devastatingly swift. Mark, unable to meet the bank's demand, saw his company collapse overnight. Apex Bank moved with brutal efficiency, placing prestige homes into receivership. Foreclosure notices were slapped on his development sites. His accounts were frozen. His company car was repossessed from the driveway of his home. He and Eleanor were trapped in the house, a pressure cooker of fear and recrimination.
Their arguments were volcanic, shaking the walls. "This is your fault," Mark screamed at his mother. "Your ridiculous spending, your need to look important. It's brought scrutiny on us." "My fault?" Eleanor shrieked back, her carefully maintained composure shattered. "You're the one who built a business on lies and debt. You were always reckless, just like your father." Chloe, the future, saw the writing on the wall. The glamorous life she had been promised was evaporating. The shopping sprees, the fancy dinners, the promise of a luxurious marriage, it was all gone. One afternoon, while Mark was frantically on the phone, begging old contacts for help, she quietly packed her bags and slipped out the back door, disappearing from his life as quickly as she had entered it. From her penthouse, Amelia watched the fallout. She read the articles in the financial papers, saw the sensational reports on the local news. Thompson provided her with daily updates, detailing the precise implosion of their lives. She felt a strange detachment, a cold, clean sense of order being restored. It wasn't glee, it was vindication. It was the feeling of a massive, long-overdue debt finally being paid. Mark, in his desperation, began calling her. The first few calls were demanding, ordering her to sign the divorce papers he had sent. He was still operating under the delusion that he held some power. "Sign the papers, Amelia. I need to liquidate this house. You're ruining everything," he yelled into her voicemail. She didn't answer. His messages grew more desperate, then pleading, and finally abusive. He left rambling, incoherent voicemails, blaming her, her father, the world for his problems. He had no idea she was the architect of his ruin. He saw her as a gnat, an inconvenience, while a hurricane of her making was tearing his world apart. The final blow came a week later. A formal foreclosure notice for the house itself was posted on the front door. They had 30 days to vacate. The life they had built, the stage for all their cruelty, was being dismantled plank by plank. They were ruined. Financially, professionally, and socially. They had hit rock bottom, but Amelia knew the true bottom was still to come. The final reckoning was yet to be delivered, and she would deliver it in person. The day of the eviction was grey and overcast, the sky threatening a miserable drizzle. It was a fitting backdrop for the final act. Movers from the bank, impersonal and efficient, were hauling furniture out of the house and loading it onto a truck. A foreclosure agent stood by with a clipboard, his expression bored. Mark and Eleanor were on the lawn, surrounded by the debris of their former life. They looked haggard, defeated. The arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind something raw and ugly. They were screaming at the movers, at the agent, at each other. It was a pathetic, desperate display. A sleek, black car, not ostentatious but radiating quiet authority, pulled up to the curb. Amelia stepped out. She wasn't wearing a power suit or dripping with jewels. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, the same one she had worn to her father's funeral. Her hair was pulled back, her face serene. She looked not like a billionaire, but like a woman who was completely and utterly in control of her own destiny. Their heads snapped toward her. A flicker of confusion crossed their faces, quickly replaced by a fresh surge of rage. They saw her as a spectator, a vulture coming to gloat over their misfortune. "What are you doing here?" Mark snarled, stalking toward her. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face unshaven. "Come to see the show. Get out of here. This is all your fault." "My fault?" Amelia asked, her voice calm, carrying easily over the noise. "How could it possibly be my fault? I'm just the dead weight, remember."
You and your wretched family came into our lives. You are a curse. Everything was fine until you and your wretched family came into our lives. You bring ruin wherever you go. Amelia let them vent. She stood perfectly still, absorbing their hatred, their baseless accusations. She let them empty themselves of all their poison. When they finally paused, breathless and shaking, a profound silence fell over the scene. The movers stopped. The agent looked on, intrigued. It was time. "You're both wrong," Amelia said, her voice cutting through the quiet. "I didn't bring this ruin. You built it. I just sent the bill." Mark stared at her, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about? You're delirious." Amelia took a slow step forward. "You spent 10 years, Mark, telling me I was worthless. You and your mother worked every single day to make me believe I was small, that I deserved nothing. You controlled my money, my friends, my life. You made me your prisoner." Her eyes were locked on his. "You stood at my father's funeral, the worst day of my life, and you introduced me to your mistress. You called it your future. You threw a few $100s at my feet and told me to disappear." She paused, letting the memory of his cruelty hang in the air between them. "But here's the thing you didn't know, Mark. While you were laughing at my grief, desecrating the memory of my father, I was becoming the most powerful person you have ever met." A slow, dawning horror began to creep into Mark's eyes. Eleanor looked back and forth between them, a confused, animalistic fear on her face. "That dreary affair you complained about?" Amelia continued, her voice gaining strength. "That was the funeral of Richard Sterling, the founder and sole owner of Sterling Global Holdings, a $55 billion corporation, an empire which he left in its entirety to me." The words hit them with the force of a physical impact. Mark staggered back, his mouth agape. Eleanor let out a small, strangled gasp. "The bank that just destroyed your company, Mark. Apex Commercial Bank. It's a subsidiary of Sterling Global. When they called your loans, it was because I told them to. I own your debt. I own what's left of you." She then turned her gaze to Eleanor, who was now trembling violently. "And your foundation, Eleanor, your precious source of social power. Its only benefactor was the Sterling Trust. My father thought your vanity was amusing. I did not. When your funding was cut, when the auditors were sent in to expose your fraud,
That was my order. The full monstrous truth settled over them. They weren't victims of bad luck or a market downturn. They were the targets of a precise, deliberate, and devastating act of retribution. And the architect of it all was the woman they had spent a decade trying to break. Mark collapsed to his knees on the damp lawn. It wasn't a dramatic fall, it was a crumbling, the complete failure of his body to support the weight of his reality. He just stared at her, babbling, his mind completely shattered. No, it can't be. You're nobody. Eleanor was a different story. The fear in her eyes curdled into a primal, insane rage. "You lie!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You lying little witch!" She lunged at Amelia, her hands clawed, her face contorted into a terrifying mask of hate. But before she could reach her, two broad, uniformed security officers, who had exited Amelia's car and stood by silently, stepped in her way. They caught her easily, restraining her as she thrashed and screamed obscenities. Amelia didn't even flinch. She just watched the woman who had tormented her for years finally and completely unravel. As if on cue, two police cars pulled up to the curb, their lights off but their presence undeniable. Two detectives stepped out, holding a warrant. "Mark Preston," one of them called out. "You're under arrest for bank fraud and embezzlement." They pulled the broken man up from the grass and cuffed him. He offered no resistance. He was gone, a hollow shell. Amelia looked at the wreckage of their lives, the house being emptied, the son in handcuffs, the mother screaming, restrained by security. It was a scene of total and absolute devastation. She had done it. She had taken everything from them, just as they had tried to take everything from her. She didn't feel joy. She felt a quiet, profound sense of justice, a balancing of the scales. She turned her back on them, on the house, on her entire former life. "You did this to yourselves," she said softly, "to no one in particular." She got back into the car without a second glance, and as it pulled away from the curb, the first drops of rain began to fall. The trials were swift. The evidence against Mark and Eleanor, meticulously compiled by Thompson's team, was overwhelming. Mark was convicted of multiple counts of fraud and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. His pathetic appeals were denied. He was just another inmate, his name and former prestige stripped away, leaving only a number. Eleanor, facing charges for embezzling from her own foundation, had a complete breakdown. She was deemed mentally unfit to stand trial and was committed to a state psychiatric facility. Her socialite friends never visited. She was left alone with the ghosts of her own making, her name becoming a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Amelia Sterling disappeared from the headlines as quickly as she had entered them. She refused all interviews, rejected all offers for books and movies. She was not interested in fame or public adoration. She was interested in building something new from the ashes of the old. She did not embrace the lavish lifestyle her wealth afforded her. The penthouse remained a place of work, not a home. She sold off her father's more ostentatious assets, the yacht, the private jet, the villa in Monaco. She streamlined Sterling Global, trimming the fat and reinvesting its profits into ethical and sustainable ventures. Her true passion, however, became the Sterling Foundation, but it wasn't a vanity project like Eleanor's. Using billions of her own inheritance, she established a global non-profit dedicated to a single cause, providing legal aid, financial support, and psychological counseling to victims of domestic, financial, and emotional abuse. She built shelters, funded scholarships, and created training programs to help people, mostly women, escape situations just like the ones she had endured. She was giving others the power she had been forced to find on her own. Months turned into a year. The memory of Mark and Eleanor began to fade, replaced by the faces of the people she was now helping. The cold satisfaction of revenge had been replaced by the quiet warmth of purpose. One afternoon, she was visiting the construction site of a new crisis center her foundation was building in the heart of the city. She stood looking over the blueprints with the lead architect, a man named David. He was kind, with intelligent eyes and a gentle smile that reached them. He spoke about his designs with a passion that was infectious. "I wanted to create a space that felt safe," he explained, pointing to a rendering of a sunlit atrium. "Not like an institution, but like a home, a place where people can start to breathe again." He looked at her, his expression one of genuine admiration. "What you're doing, Miss Sterling, it's incredible." "Please, call me Amelia," she said, a real, unforced smile gracing her lips for what felt like the first time in forever. "And what you're designing, it's exactly what I hoped for." They talked for over an hour, not about business or balance sheets, but about art, about purpose, about building things that last. In his presence, she felt not like a CEO or an heiress, but simply like herself. A woman who had survived, who had fought back, and who was now, finally, free. As she left the site, she looked back at the rising structure of steel and glass. It was a symbol of her new life, a testament to her victory. Her father had left her an empire of money and power, but she had transformed it into an empire of hope. True wealth, she had come to understand, wasn't measured in dollars or stock prices. It was measured in dignity, in resilience, and in the quiet strength it takes to rebuild a shattered world. The cruelest people build their thrones on foundations of sand, and a single wave of truth is all it takes to wash them away, leaving nothing behind but the memory of their own pathetic ruin. Amelia Sterling had been that wave, and now the storm was over and the tide was finally, peacefully going out.